Glad to know you're still with us. The Bank of Ghana has secured a bailout from the International Monetary Fund, IMF, saying that it would have been challenging but for the implementation of the Domestic Debt Exchange Program, DDEP. To address the economic challenges, the government initiated an IMF program and introduced the DDEP, which resulted in some bondholders experiencing a reduction in their investments and coupons, while the Bank of Ghana reported a loss of 60.9 billion cedis due to impairments that occurred during the Domestic Debt Exchange Program. And from Accra, Ghana, I am joined by Baah Abankwa, financial analyst and investment advisor. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you very much for having me on your show once again.
All right, now tell us about the Domestic Debt Exchange Program and how instrumental it was in securing the IMF bailout.
So, as you rightly said, the Domestic Debt Exchange Program played a critical role in securing the IMF bailout because it demonstrated Ghana's commitment to fiscal consolidation. Ghana was at the point where government was able to promise a payment of returns on the treasury bill and bonds. So there had to be a bailout from IMF, and for IMF to come in, there were two things that they were looking at. They were looking at government being able to reduce its debt burden and also improve its debt sustainability. So for government to be able to get that kind of support from IMF, there was a need for government to bring this program before IMF considers that. The program success is one, achieving high participation from the domestic bondholders, which started and signaled willingness of everyone, including Ghanaians and also our external debtors, to be able to participate in sharing the burden that was upon the country, because we're getting to the point that interest were not going to be paid, and also there was going to be default in the principal. So that's how important the program has been in terms of the bailout that government got from IMF.
All right, talking about this, I'm tempted to go back to this conversation because we've had it before. I mean, how did we get here? And how are we sure that we won't have to keep, having this rollover of DDEPs just to save the country? Are measures in place to address the issues? I mean, the causative factors.
So, I mean, the main factor had to do with government spending beyond its means. And that started right from the issue of COVID. So when COVID hit and productivity went down, government had to take a step of supporting citizens by engaging in some kind of expenditure that was not backed by revenue that was coming through by way of taxes. And over the years, government upon government for the last 20 years had been relying so much on the capital market to shore up differences in the aid budget year on year. So when the COVID issue started and government was blocked from being able to participate in the capital market, then came a big shortfall in terms of revenue that government had to now find ways and means to recover it. And this is the case, the economy was not growing because of post-COVID, so revenues were not coming in as expected, and this is a situation where you can also go to the capital market. So it was building up in terms of the debt that was becoming unsustainable. And once it becomes unsustainable and you don't have any available means of taxing within the country because businesses are not growing, revenues are not coming, then you get to a point where now you begin to sense default in paying debt that you owe both domestically and also externally. So that's the major cause of our problems as a country over the last 3 to 4 years, because we're not able to plan and foresee some of these challenges and be able to map up strategies, especially when we should have halted some expenditure as a country, because things were not going as expected by way of the revenue that we were expecting from businesses and also productivity in the country.
Will it be okay to just blame all of this on COVID-19 period, really? I mean, Ghana isn't or wasn't the only country that had that period, and some other economies are already recovering. So beyond COVID, what are the other, factors that are responsible for where we are in Ghana?
Yes, so COVID was more like what sparked the challenges that we had, which we all knew about. So government were only getting loans to support expenditure over a period of time. And as you always go in for this loan to support your expenditure, don't forget it has an impact on your exchange rate. And once your exchange rate keeps on depreciating, it means that the amount of money that you need by way of cedis to be able to pay their interest and principal that are maturing in dollars and euros was growing up. And over time, if that grows up to a certain point and you cannot meet up the challenges, then that becomes a problem. So COVID was only a spark for us to see that, hey, the journey that we're moving was not a journey that was sustainable. And as I said, because we're also cut off from the capital market, then the issue became more real, because in the past, we were only relying on the capital market to shore up the deficit in our revenue. And now capital market, bond market has been stopped. We can't go into that. So then there was a big gap that we could not fill. And that's where the challenges started coming in. And that has affected a number of hardship that we are facing in the country by way of inflation, exchange rate, interest rate, a whole lot of things happening within the last 3 to 4 years.
All right, let's get back to the DDEP conversation. Now, the program involved extending the maturities and reducing interest rates on domestic government bonds. But what was key for investors who had initially resisted the program and even the IMF during the discussions?
So, I mean, while the DDEP involved extending maturities and reducing interest rates, it also offered new bonds with some improved features to incentivize people that wanted to participate. So for investors, these features included one, accumulation of interest that could be added to the principal amount, potentially increasing their future returns. Again, issues relating to tax exemption. So some of these bondholders had some kind of businesses or some engagement in Ghana that were going to be benefiting from some tax exemption. So new bonds that were offered, some came with some tax benefits that were attractive to these investors. For IMF, I think that the key aspect was achieving a significant reduction in the government's debt service cost, which will make Ghana's public financial services more manageable. I think the high participation rate also reassured IMF that Ghana was indeed committed to the program, and investors were also seeing some kind of a green light for them to be able to sign up to the new arrangement that was given under the debt exchange program.
All right, let's talk about some critics now who sort of argue that the program imposed undue hardship on domestic investors, and people who invested in these bonds lost out because they would receive their money later and earn less interest, while the Bank of Ghana, which held some of the government bonds, had the DDEP reduce the bonds value, losing 60.9 billion cedis on its books. Now, do you see this program as a necessary but temporal pain for a much higher gain, especially for the domestic investors? Is that what we're going to see this as?
Yeah, I think I see it in that light. So the DDEP did present challenges for domestic investors and also foreign investors. However, we need to ask ourselves, was it really necessary? For me, I think it was the only alternative at the point in time for government, because without the program, government might have defaulted on its debt anyway, leading to a more severe financial crisis with potentially greater hardship for all Ghanaians. So I think it was a necessary but difficult step to take, which, if government is committed to the program, in the long term, we'll have a stable economy with this program. My challenge, as I always say, and I've said it on this platform before, is government's commitment to practice fiscal discipline, especially looking at this year where we have election. Over the last 20 or 30 years, whenever there's an election year, government upon government tend to spend beyond the available funds that they need to because of election. So if government is committed to this program by way of also replicating the confidence that investors have reposed in the DDEP, then we should expect that in the long run, government will be able to achieve a long-term economic stability for the country.
Well, do you think that, this particular issue is going to probably discourage future investments in Ghana's government bonds?
Yeah, I think at the moment, many people do not even want to talk about government bonds at the moment, especially local investors. But I think that DDP might, even though it created a bit of apprehension among future investors, I think that government can build trust with this program through one, transparency. So clear communication about future economic policies and debt management strategies should be made clear to everybody with some kind of timelines and commitment. Again, market-oriented reforms should come out of this program. So that means government should begin to implement reforms towards its financial market and make it more efficient and attractive both to the local and foreign investor. Again, government should also try and honor its commitment under the debt exchange program. If government begin to honor, for example, people who have their returns or coupons maturing this year, government begins to pay. Then it begins to rebuild confidence in the sector. And over time, you see that the confidence will be restored as it used to be if government is still committed to the program over the period that we are running the program with IMF.
Well, this country, Ghana, which we're talking about today, has been grappling with high inflation and a depreciating currency. But now, with the provision of billions of dollars in loans and technical assistance, how far-reaching do you think this will be in stabilizing the economy?
I think the first thing that the funds that are pushed into the country is going to do is boosting our foreign exchange reserves. Before the IMF program, Ghana's foreign reserve was just around, I think, 2 months cover. But I think that with this funds that are coming in, it's helping to stabilize the cedi and reduce inflation by allowing government to manage the exchange rate more effectively because funds are not coming in, which are being used to shore up our foreign exchange reserve. Again, it's also supporting government expenditure. The funds can be used to invest in critical areas like infrastructure and social programs, which will also, in effect, promote economic growth. So, for me, these are the initial benefits that we are getting from this program that must be sustained over a period of time so that the gains will be one that in the future, 2, 3, 5 years' time, we'll be able to point back and say that indeed this was a good step that was taken by government.
All right, so for you, what's Ghana's fiscal portfolio and debt sustainability like?
So the DDEP combined with IMF program, I think, aims to improve Ghana's fiscal portfolio and debt sustainability. We should see it as a reduction in the debt to GDP ratio over time. That's the first thing we are going to get as a benefit if government is committed. And that will make government's finances a bit healthier. The specific numbers will depend on the final details of the IMF program over the period of time. At the moment, we only have patches of the agreements, and I'm sure once the third tranche is given, then we'll have the full and the final details of the agreement to be able to know the specific numbers that will be seen by way of the debt to GDP ratio, which will make government's finances a bit healthier and more sustainable.
Right, as Ghana finalizes the IMF deal and sort of seeks to implement economic reforms, I mean, the success of the strategy will depend on how well it is able to manage its debt going forward and rebuild investor confidence. And you sort of made reference to that earlier. But tell me, how would you expect the handlers to go about this?
I think the first thing is that government should focus on prudent spending. So spending should be on priorities, areas that we are going to get returns in the short term and not long-term investment. If government begins to and continue to invest in the long-term projects, then it means that in the short term we are still going to struggle, and that means that we should avoid unnecessary borrowing. The second thing is that government should explore ways to increase tax revenue and broaden its economic base to reduce dependence on debt. So over the period of time, whilst I was growing up, I've been hearing about government widening its tax net. Over the last 30, 40 years, we are still taxing the same net. Once we go out and we're able to find innovative ways to rake in more revenue, then we'll be able to sustain ourselves beyond always going for IMF bailout. Then the third thing is that government should focus on policies that promote economic growth, and then also that will generate more revenue for debt servicing and improve investor confidence. For me, if government is able to implement some of these measures, then we can be on a good road to rebuild trust with investors and also ensure long-term economic sustainability as a country.
All right, you talked about something which is revenue generation, and you talked about tax also, how that they've been on that conversation for so long, but you haven't necessarily seen any change. So first, I'd like you to talk to me about your recommendations for that, because here in Nigeria, we have a fiscal policy and tax reforms committee that's doing, analysts say they are doing well, and they have their recommendations now submitted to government for approval and all of that. But talk to me, what are your recommendations for Ghana?
I think that when you look at the tax base in the country in terms of income tax, we are only targeting about 30% of Ghanaians with income tax. And if you have the remaining 70% who are, active and can pay, who are usually find themselves in the informal sector, not contributing anything to the tax base or the revenue base of the country, then that's going to be a problem because you have 30% of the people generating revenue to feed the remaining 70%. So that becomes a challenge. So government should find ways and means to engage these informal sectors and to be able to know how they can get these people to pay income tax on the revenue that they are making. I employ a lot of people who come to work informally at home, various areas. These are people that come in, they make their monies, no tax on it. So they just move on. Meanwhile, if people are in the formal sector, they make revenue and they are taxed over there. So if government wants to expand its revenue base, the first thing is that how can we target this informal sector? How can we get people recruited to be able to target this informal sector to rake in the revenue that we need as a country? For me, that is the first thing. Then again, properties are also very important. People that own properties, what is the tax and the implementation to get these taxes from people that own properties across the various countries? We have it on our books as a tax, but when it comes to its implementation, there is no commitment from government upon government to implement some of these things. For me, with these two things that we've mentioned, if government is able to channel their effort towards that, we should begin to see our revenue base growing up over time. But the key thing is that people will only pay taxes when they think that something is being used with a tax. So that's where government will have to be transparent and ensure that they engage in prudent projects that people can pinpoint and point that I gave my tax and this is what it was used for. If that is not done, no matter the ways that we try to fashion our taxes, people will try to evade tax, will avoid the tax, and at the long run, we'll still be at the same place that we are as a country.
Well, talking about informal sector, I'm of the opinion that we shouldn't just tax them, just anyhow, because I feel that there should be a cap. If you're not making it up to a certain amount annually, you don't have any business paying income tax. That's something you're talking about, right? Or you share a different perspective?
No, I agree with you, but these are all mechanisms that will go into the tax system that we want to focus on. I agree that if someone is not making a certain limit or amount of income for a month because the person is a startup business, there should be some kind of waiver or leeway for them. But that said, there are still bigger fishes out there who can contribute, are not doing, especially artisans. Artisans that offer their services, they get their pay, they don't contribute anything. Meanwhile, these are people that form the majority of people in the country, people in the agri sector, the commercial sector, the farming sector. How can we bring all of them together? So that will come into the nitty-gritties or the structure or the base that we need to set for the informal sector, where we will now say that, okay, there are some people that we are going to take off for the next 5 years, and we'll not focus on them after 5 years. That will be the details that will be designed if you want to really target the informal sector.
Right, and technology will definitely have a role to play there. Patrick Baah Abankwa, financial analyst and investment advisor. Thank you so much for your time on the show.
Thank you very much for having me once again on the show.